Cora Jennings pressed her last coin into the storekeeper's palm and watched him drop it on the floor without picking it up. "That won't even buy you the dust off my shelves," he said. She didn't cry. She'd run out of tears somewhere between the second town that turned her away and the third. She just bent down, picked the coin back up, and walked out into the blazing Bisbee summer with her head held so straight it looked like pride. It wasn't pride. It was all she had left. If this story already has you gripping your seat, please subscribe to our channel and follow Cora's journey all the way to the end. Drop a comment and tell us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The stagecoach had pulled out of Bisbee before the dust even settled behind it, leaving Cora Jennings standing in the middle of Main Street with a carpet bag that weighed less than her shame and a name that meant nothing to anyone in this town. That was fine. She hadn't come to Bisbee to be known. She'd come because she had nowhere else to go. It was the kind of July that turned men mean and made animals lie down in the shade and refuse to move. The sun sat on top of Bisbee like a fist pressing down, and the whole town smelled of iron ore mule sweat and money that never seemed to reach the people who dug it out of the ground. Miners moved in loud, dirty clusters along the boardwalks. Women in bright dresses watched from second-floor windows. Children ran barefoot through horse tracks dried hard as brick. Nobody looked at Cora twice. She was 31 years old, brown-haired, thin from a winter and spring that hadn't been kind, wearing a dress that had been mended so many times. The original fabric was more memory than material. She carried herself carefully, the way a person does when they've learned that drawing attention costs more than it's worth. The general store was her first stop. She had $7.40 to her name, what remained after the stage fare, after the bad season in Tucson, after the doctor's bill. She still couldn't think about without her throat tightening. $7.40. In a mining town in the summer of 1878, that was maybe 3 weeks of survival if she was careful, if she found work fast. She pushed through the door of Hartwell's Dry Goods and let her eyes adjust to the dimness. "Help you?" The man behind the counter didn't look up from his ledger. He was thick-necked and red-faced, with the kind of expression that had settled permanently somewhere between boredom and contempt. "I'm looking for work," Cora said. "Any kind. Mending, laundry, cooking. I'm reliable, and I'm quick." He looked up then. Looked her over, the way a man looks at livestock. "You from around here?" "No, sir. Just arrived." "Got a husband?" "No, sir." He set his pen down. "Family?" "No." He picked his pen back up. "Can't help you." Cora kept her voice even. "I wasn't asking for charity. I was asking for work. And I said I can't help you." He didn't look up again. "There's a boarding house at the end of Crane Street. Mrs. Puddicombe. She takes in women without—" He paused just long enough to make the pause mean something. "Attachments. $1.50 a week. You'd best start there." Cora thanked him, which she shouldn't have done, and walked out. She tried 3 more establishments in the next hour. The seamstress on Copper Avenue said she had all the help she needed. The laundry operation behind the hotel said the same. The woman who ran the bakehouse on the corner of 2nd looked at Cora's mended dress and her solitary carpet bag and said very gently that she only hired local girls whose families she knew. "I understand," Cora said. She did understand. She'd been understanding the same thing in a different town every few months for going on 2 years now. She found Mrs. Puddicombe's boarding house on Crane Street, a narrow 2-story building wedged between a harness shop and an assay office with geraniums in the window boxes that were fighting hard to stay alive in the heat. She knocked. A small, sharp-eyed woman in her 60s answered. "Mrs. Puddicombe." "That's me." The woman looked her over with the same measuring quality as the storekeeper, but without the contempt. Just assessment. "You looking for a room?" "I am. I was told $1.50 a week." "That's right. Meals included, which is the only reason it ain't criminal to charge that much." She stepped back and held the door. "Come in then. I'll need a week up front." Cora stepped inside and set her carpet bag down. She opened her coin purse and counted out $1.50. She looked at what remained. $6. She closed the purse. "You got work lined up?" Mrs. Puddicombe asked, watching her. "I'm looking." The old woman made a small sound that wasn't quite sympathy and wasn't quite doubt. "Town's particular," she said. "Always has been. Mining money makes men feel like they've earned the right to be choosy." She handed Cora a key. "Rooms at the top of the stairs, second on the left. Supper's at 6. I don't allow gentlemen callers, liquor, or self-pity past the front hall." Despite everything, something in Cora's chest loosened slightly. "Yes, ma'am. Get settled. You look like you need to sit down." She didn't look back as she said it, already moving toward the kitchen, and Cora stood alone in the narrow hallway with her $6 and her carpet bag and thought 1 week. She had 1 week to make this work. Boy. She spent the rest of that afternoon methodically working her way through every business on Main Street and the 2 cross streets she could reach before her feet started to ache. A hotel. A saloon she tried because she wasn't in a position to be proud about it. A livery stable, a doctor's office, a land surveyor, and a small newspaper office that smelled of ink and old paper. By the time the sun started dropping behind the western ridge, she had nothing. Not a promise, not a maybe, not even a "come back and we'll see." She sat down on a bench outside the surveyor's office and let herself feel it for exactly 60 seconds. The weight of it. The specific grinding exhaustion of being unwanted in a place where you had no choice but to be. Then she stood up, straightened her back, and started walking toward Mrs. Puddicombe's. She was half a block from the boarding house when she heard the girls. 2 of them, maybe 9 and 11 years old, were standing outside the harness shop in the last orange light of evening, one of them crying silently, and the other one staring at the ground with an expression far too old for her face. They were dressed plainly, but cleanly. The older one had her arm around the younger one in that careful, practiced way that meant she'd been doing it for a long time. Cora slowed. She knew she shouldn't stop. She had her own problems, and children in a mining town on a summer evening were not her responsibility, and she was tired, clear down to her bones. She stopped anyway. "You 2 all right?" she asked. The older girl looked up. She had brown eyes and a wariness in them that made Cora think of herself at that age, which was not a comfortable thing to think about. "We're fine," the girl said. "She's not fine," the younger one said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "She's just saying that." "Nettie?" "Where's your people?" Cora asked. "Our pa's in the saloon," the older girl said. Her tone was careful and flat. "He said he'd be out directly. That was a while ago." Cora glanced toward the end of the street, where the sound of piano music and loud voices floated from the Double Eagle. "How long is a while?" The girl looked at her sister, then back at Cora. "Since noon." Cora sat down on the edge of the boardwalk beside them. She didn't ask any more questions. She just sat there, which she'd learned a long time ago was sometimes the only thing you could offer a person. "I'm Cora," she said. After a moment, the older girl said, "I'm May. This is Nettie." "Hello, May." "Hello, Nettie." Cora reached into her carpet bag and found the small paper-wrapped biscuit she'd been saving from the stage and handed it to Nettie. "You eaten today?" Nettie looked at her sister. May looked at the biscuit, then at Cora, then nodded once, which was permission, and Nettie took it. They sat in the fading heat for a while, the 3 of them watching the street empty out as evening came on. Cora asked them small questions. May answered them in monosyllables at first, and then gradually in full sentences. They were from up in the mountains originally. Their father had a cabin 2 hours' ride northeast, but he'd been bringing them into town for the past 3 weeks to look for a housekeeper because their regular woman had left in May, and their pa couldn't manage the house and the work both. "Why'd she leave?" Cora asked. May's expression closed down slightly. "She just did." Nettie, who was eating the biscuit in tiny, careful bites to make it last, said, "She was scared of Pa." Nettie: "She was. You know she was." Cora looked at May, who was looking at the street. "Is your father a frightening man?" May was quiet for a moment. "He ain't mean," she said carefully. He don't talk much. And he looks—" She paused. "He looks like something happened to him, and people get scared when someone looks like that." "That's fair," Cora said. They heard him before they saw him. Not yelling, not stumbling. Just heavy footsteps on the boardwalk, steady and deliberate, coming from the direction of the Double Eagle, with the specific rhythm of a man who knows exactly how much he's drunk, and is walking carefully because of it. He was tall. That was the first thing. Broad through the shoulders, with the kind of build that didn't come from a gym or a parlor. It came from years of splitting wood and hauling stone and living the way the land required. He wore a plain work shirt, dark trousers, and a hat that had been new some time before the war. He had a beard that was several weeks past intentional and dark eyes that moved over the street in quick habitual assessment. He stopped when he saw the three of them. His eyes went to his daughters first, a fast-checking look that confirmed they were present and unharmed, and then to Cora. His expression didn't change exactly. It just got more guarded. "May," he said. "Nettie." "Pa," May said. "You been sitting out here long?" May looked at Cora, then back at her father. "Miss Cora sat with us." His eyes moved back to Cora. She stood because she had the feeling this was a conversation that shouldn't happen with her at ground level. "Thank you," he said. His voice was quiet and low, and he said it like he meant it, which she hadn't expected. "They're good company," Cora said. A pause. He was looking at her the way people look at something they're trying to figure out, not unfriendly, just careful. "You from around here? Just arrived today?" "Got people here?" "No." His jaw moved slightly. He looked at his daughters again. Some kind of internal calculation was happening behind those dark eyes, and Cora had enough experience with desperate situations to recognize when someone else was standing inside one. "You looking for work?" he asked. Cora felt the question hit her somewhere in the center of her chest. "I am." "What kind?" "Any kind." She kept her voice steady. "I can cook, clean, sew, manage a household. I'm not particular and I'm not lazy." He was quiet for a moment. May was watching him with an expression of carefully contained hope that broke Cora's heart a little. "I got a cabin up in the mountains," he said, 2 hours northeast. "I got work that needs doing, keeping the place cooking, looking after these two when I'm working. Last woman I had walked off in May." He paused. "It's hard country, hot in summer, brutal in winter. It's no place for someone who wants easy." "I don't want easy," Cora said. "I want work." He looked at her for a long time. "Room and board plus $1 a week," he said. "That's what I can offer." It wasn't much. It was a long way from town. She didn't know this man from Adam, and she had no reason in the world to trust him, and going off into the mountains with a stranger was exactly the kind of decision that ended badly in the kinds of stories women told each other in low voices. She thought about her $6. She thought about Mrs. Puddicombe's boarding house and the week that wouldn't stretch to 2. She thought about the seamstress and the bakehouse and the man who'd dropped her last coin on the floor. "All right," she said. He nodded once like she'd confirmed something he'd already decided. He looked at his girls. "We leave tomorrow at first light. Your things ready to pack?" "Yes, Pa," May said. And the careful hope in her face was no longer hidden. He looked back at Cora. "I'm Ethan Carson." "Cora Jennings." He touched the brim of his hat, just slightly, just once. Then he looked at his daughters. "Let's go get supper." They ate at the small restaurant on Copper Avenue, Cora, because Ethan had said she was working for him now, and this was the first meal of it, and she hadn't argued. Nettie talked through almost all of supper in the way that only the very young can, bright and relentless, and unaware that the rest of them were wrapped in their own complicated silences. May ate neatly and watched her father. Ethan ate efficiently and said almost nothing. Cora learned through Nettie's cheerful artillery of information that their mother had died 2 winters ago. That Ethan had been up in the mountains since before either girl could remember. That the last housekeeper, a Mrs. Fenton, had apparently left in the middle of the night without explanation. That there was a dog named Roof, who was old and deaf and very fat. That the view from the cabin porch on clear mornings was the most beautiful thing in the world. "Nettie," May said quietly, "let Miss Cora eat." "It's all right," Cora said. "I like knowing what I'm walking into." Ethan looked at her, then a quick, unguarded look that she couldn't quite read before it was gone. After supper, he walked them back toward Crane Street. At the corner, he stopped. "Tomorrow," he said. "Sunrise." "I'll be ready," Cora said. Nettie grabbed her hand without warning and squeezed it once fiercely and then let go and ran after her father, who was already walking. May paused. "She's been waiting a long time for someone to come back with us," May said quietly. Cora looked at the girl. "And you?" May considered this seriously, the way children do when they've learned not to want things too quickly. "I reckon I'll see," she said. Then she turned and followed her father, and Cora stood on the corner of Crane Street and 2nd in the hot Bisbee dark, listening to the sounds of the saloon a block away and the distant rhythmic clanging from the mine up the hill, and thought about what exactly she'd just agreed to. She was awake before dawn. She hadn't slept much. The boarding house was quiet except for the settling of old wood and the occasional coyote somewhere out in the dark hills, and she'd lain on top of her narrow bed in her mended dress and stared at the ceiling and thought clearly and carefully about Ethan Carson. He was a man with a grief in him. That much was obvious. The way he moved through a room, careful, contained, like he was managing a weight that other people couldn't see. The way he'd looked at her when she said she didn't want easy. Something in that look had been almost recognition, and she didn't know what to do with that. She thought about May's voice, saying he looks like something happened to him. She thought about Nettie's hand squeezing hers. She didn't know if she was making a mistake. She'd made enough of them that she could usually recognize the shape of one, and this had a different shape. It felt less like a mistake, and more like a door she was standing in front of, and the only question was whether she had the nerve to walk through it. She had $7.40, no $6 now, and no prospects in Bisbee, and 2 little girls who'd been waiting since May for someone to come back with them to their mountain. She packed her carpeted bag in the dark, folding each piece of clothing carefully, and she was sitting on the front steps when the first gray light started separating the mountains from the sky. Ethan Carson rode up a few minutes later with a pack mule and a horse for her and his 2 daughters on the seat of a small wagon. He didn't look surprised to find her ready. He just nodded. "Morning," he said. "Morning," Cora said. Nettie waved both arms from the wagon seat. May sat beside her with the reins, watching Cora load her bag, and said nothing. But there was something settled in her expression, something slightly less guarded than the night before. Not trust, not yet, but the possibility of it. Ethan handed Cora the reins of the extra horse without ceremony. "It's a straightforward ride," he said. "Stay behind the wagon. She's sure-footed, but she don't like rabbits." "I'll keep that in mind," Cora said. He turned his horse and led them out through the edge of Bisbee, past the assay office and the silent mine machinery and the last scatter of buildings at the edge of town, and out onto the trail that rose steadily toward the northeast, climbing into the dry mountains, with the morning sun beginning to press down from behind them, hot already and getting hotter. She didn't know this man. She didn't know these mountains. She didn't know what was waiting for her at the end of this ride, whether it was the thing she'd been working toward for 2 desperate years, or just another version of the same disappointment wearing a different face. But Nettie was singing something to herself on the wagon seat, low and tuneless and private. And the morning air coming down off the peaks had a different quality than the air in town. Cooler, sharper, carrying the smell of pine and stone and something clean. And Cora rode behind the wagon with her back straight and her hands steady on the reins, and let herself very cautiously, like opening a door, just a crack, feel something that might eventually become hope. The cabin was not what she'd expected. That wasn't a bad thing necessarily. Cora had learned early in life that expectations were a luxury she couldn't afford, and she'd stopped carrying them the way other women carried coin purses, light, close, easily reached. But still, She'd built something in her mind during the 2-hour ride up through the pine corridors and switchback trails, some composite image made of hard angles and neglect, and the particular kind of disorder that follows a man left alone too long, with a grief he doesn't know how to manage. What she found instead was a solid, square-hewn structure, with a good roof and a stone chimney sitting at the edge of a clearing, with a woodpile stacked higher than her head, and a garden that had gone mostly to weed, but still showed the bones of something that had once been tended with care. Ethan pulled his horse up and swung down without ceremony. "It ain't much," he said. "It's a roof," Cora said. He looked at her for a second, that same unreadable measuring look she was already learning to expect from him, and then turned to help Nettie down from the wagon. Nettie hit the ground running and immediately disappeared around the side of the cabin, presumably toward the dog, because within 10 seconds there was an explosion of ecstatic barking that was too energetic for an animal described as old and fat. "Roof ain't that deaf," May said, climbing down herself. She was watching Cora with that careful, sidelong attention she'd been using since last night, not hostile, just cautious. The way a person watches a new piece of ground before putting their weight on it. "You want to see the inside?" she asked Cora. "I do," Cora said. The inside told her everything the outside hadn't. It wasn't filthy. It was clear Ethan kept it to a functional standard: dishes, stacked, floor swept, no garbage left to rot. But there was a specific quality to a house managed by someone who's going through the motions without any investment in the result. Surfaces that were clean but joyless. A kitchen that had everything it needed and nothing it wanted. 2 small beds in the back room that had been made up with military efficiency and no warmth. And then, one corner of the main room, a rocking chair beside the cold fireplace with a small sewing basket on the floor beside it that still had the quality of someone else's space. Undisturbed. Almost avoided. Cora didn't say anything about it. She just noted it the way she noted the single-framed photograph on the mantelpiece, the woman in it young and dark-eyed and serious, and she filed it away with everything else she was learning about this house and its people. "Mrs. Fenton slept in the back room, left side," May said from the doorway. "That's fine," Cora said. "She left her quilt when she went. Pa said we should keep it in case—" May stopped. "In case someone else came. That was practical of him. He's practical. A beat. It's one of the things about him. He don't say much, but what he does for a reason." Cora turned and looked at May properly. The girl was watching her with an expression that had shifted slightly, still cautious, but something underneath it that wanted to be said. "What is it?" Cora asked. May was quiet for a moment. Then, "Mrs. Fenton left because Pa came home from town one night, and he'd been drinking, and he didn't do nothing to her," she added quickly, and the quickness of it told Cora how many times she'd said that particular sentence in her head. He got real quiet. The bad kind of quiet. And he sat in that chair." She nodded toward the rocking chair by the fireplace. "And he didn't move for a real long time. And when she came out to check on him, he looked at her and said, 'You ain't her.'" May's jaw tightened. Mrs. Fenton packed her bag that night. The silence between them had weight. "He meant your mother," Cora said. "Yes." Cora looked at the rocking chair. She looked at the sewing basket. She looked back at May. "Thank you for telling me that," she said. May lifted one shoulder. "Figured you should know what you walked into." Her voice was still careful, still measured. But she met Cora's eyes when she said it, which was something. She started working that same afternoon. Not because Ethan asked her to. He'd taken himself out to the woodpile and was splitting logs with the focused intensity of a man trying to outrun something, but because the kitchen needed it and standing around waiting for instruction had never been her way. Nettie found her inside and immediately appointed herself assistant, which meant fetching things and asking questions in roughly equal measure. "Can you make biscuits?" Mrs. Fenton made terrible biscuits. May said they tasted like chalk, but she wouldn't say it in front of Pa because she didn't want to hurt Mrs. Fenton's feelings. "I thought they tasted like chalk too," But I said it because I was 7 and didn't know better. How old are you? Do you have any children? Why not? Do you have a husband? No, yes and no, Cora said. Nettie considered this. Which answer goes with which question? Work it out. Nettie worked it out with a furrowed brow and then said, You had a husband and he died. He left, Cora said. She kept her voice even, kept her hands moving. A long time ago. That's worse than dying, Nettie said with the brutal honesty of the young. Cora's hands stilled for just a moment. Sometimes, she said. Hand me that bowl. Nettie handed her the bowl, and then apparently deciding the topic had been handled sufficiently, moved on to asking whether Cora knew how to braid hair, because May always braided hers too tight, and it gave her headaches. Supper that evening was the first real test. Cora had made a proper meal biscuits that did not taste like chalk, a thick stew from the dried beans and salt pork she'd found in the larder, and a skillet of cornbread, because the girls had mentioned it twice while she was cooking, which was as clear a request as she needed. Ethan came in from outside, washed his hands, and sat down at the head of the table. He looked at the food. He looked at Cora. Then he looked at his daughters. Say grace, he told May. May said grace. They ate. Nettie talked. May watched. Ethan was quiet. But he ate 2 full plates, which Cora noted. When Nettie finally stopped talking long enough to take a breath and then filled it by asking, Pa, do you think Miss Cora's gonna stay? The table went very still. Ethan put down his fork. He looked at Nettie with an expression that was tired and fond and complicated all at once. That's between Miss Cora and me, he said. But do you want her to? Nettie, May started. I'm asking Pa. Ethan was quiet for a moment. His eyes moved to Cora's face and stayed there just a second too long for it to be casual. That depends on whether she finds the work suits her, he said. It wasn't an answer, but it wasn't a no. She'd been there 4 days when the first real trouble showed itself. The trouble had a name, Ray Dobbins. He rode up mid-morning on the 4th day while Ethan was up on the North Ridge checking traps, and he came the way people come when they know the man of the house is gone unhurried. Easy with that particular confidence of someone who's tested the boundaries of a place before and found them soft. Cora was hanging laundry when she heard the horse. She had her hands full of wet linen and a mouthful of clothespins, and she turned to see a man maybe 10 years older than Ethan, broad-faced and red around the nose with a smile that showed too many teeth and didn't involve his eyes in any meaningful way. Morning, he said without getting down. Cora took the clothespins out of her mouth. Can I help you? Looking for Ethan. He was looking at her the way she'd been looked at before, the specific calculation of a man appraising something he's wondering if he can get a good price on. Don't believe I've seen you before. I work for Mr. Carson, Cora said. Something shifted behind his eyes. That's so. Not a question. Since when? Since this week. She turned back to the laundry. He's up on the North Ridge, should be back around noon. I'll wait. She hadn't offered for him to wait, but he swung down anyway and tied his horse to the fence post like the yard was his and came and leaned against the side of the cabin with his arms crossed and that too wide smile still in place. Where you from? He asked. Tucson most recently. Most recently. He said it with an amusement that felt like a door he was holding open, waiting for her to walk through it. That's an interesting way to put it. Is it? Cora said. What's your name? Miss Jennings. He laughed short and genuine in a way that was somehow worse than a fake laugh. Ethan hired himself a formal one, did he? He looked her over again. He tell you much about me? He hasn't mentioned you. He picked something off his sleeve. Ray Dobbins. I run the Double Eagle down in Bisbee. Ethan and I go back a ways. He owes me a conversation he's been putting off for about 3 months. Cora said nothing. She moved to the next section of line and shook out a shirt. You know, Dobbins said last woman he hired lasted 2 weeks. One before that 4 days. One before that didn't even make it through the first night. He said it pleasantly casually in the tone of someone sharing interesting local history. Place has a way of running women off. Cora clipped a shirt to the line. I'm not easily run. Dobbins was quiet for a moment. Then he said less pleasantly, that cabin's a long way from town. She turned and looked at him directly. Yes, she said. It is. Which means if there were trouble up here, Mr. Carson would have a long way to ride before anyone told him about it. She let that sit between them, clear as well water. Dobbins looked at her for a long second. The too-wide smile faded by several degrees. You always this direct, generally. Huh. He pushed off the wall and walked back toward his horse. Tell Ethan I came by. Tell him we need to talk about the agreement. He'll know what it means. He rode off without another word. Cora stood in the yard with her heart beating faster than she'd let show, listening to his horse, until the sound went quiet in the trees. She didn't tell the girls. She just went back inside and made a note in the part of her mind that kept track of important things, filed neatly between May, doesn't like to be watched when she's reading, and the pantry door sticks on the left side if it's been raining. Ray Dobbins. The Double Eagle. An agreement 3 months overdue. She'd seen enough of the world to know that when a man like that used the word agreement, he rarely meant anything good by it. Shag. Ethan came back at noon. He came in through the back and went straight to the wash basin, and Cora set a plate in front of him, and then without preamble said, You had a visitor this morning, Ray Dobbins. Ethan's hands went still in the wash basin. He said what? His voice was quiet and controlled, but the quality of the quiet was different. Said he needed to talk to you about the agreement. Said you'd know what he meant. Ethan dried his hands slowly. His back was to her, and she couldn't see his face, but she could see the set of his shoulders, which told her more than his face probably would have anyway. He bother you? He asked. He tried to. He turned around then. He looked at her face, reading something there, and something in his expression contracted fast and hard, like a fist closing. What did he do? He implied that the cabin being isolated was my problem, Cora said. I implied that it worked both ways. He left. Ethan stared at her for a moment. She couldn't read what was in his eyes exactly. It was too complicated, too many things at once, but one of them was something that looked like it might be relief. He won't come back while I'm here, he said. What's the agreement? Cora asked. The silence stretched. That's not your concern, he said. It became my concern this morning when he rode into your yard and looked at me like he was calculating something, Cora said. Her voice stayed even. I'm not asking to meddle Ethan. I'm asking so I know what I'm dealing with. He was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the wall behind her, and then at his plate, and then finally at her face. I borrowed money from him, he said. 2 years back. After Martha died. The name landed in the room like a stone into still water. Things were bad. I needed the money and Dobbins had it, and I wasn't in any condition to think hard about what kind of man he was. He pulled out a chair and sat down, not to eat, just to sit. He's been calling in favors ever since. Not the money itself, just favors. Use of my land for some of his supply routes. Looking the other way when certain wagons come through. I've been putting him off for 3 months. Because you don't want to do it. Because it ain't legal. His voice was flat. I'm a lot of things. I ain't that. Cora sat down across from him. Not close. Just across the table at the same level. What's he going to do when you tell him no? Ethan's jaw moved. I don't know exactly. Make it hard. He's got friends in town. Bisbee runs on the Double Eagle's money more than most people like to admit. Does he know about your girls? The question landed hard. Ethan looked at her sharply. What? Does he know he can use them to pressure you? The silence that followed was a different kind than all the other silences she'd been learning from this man. This one was dangerous. Not at her, she understood that instantly, but the danger in it was real. He wouldn't, Ethan said. Men like that, Cora said carefully, generally do exactly what they have to do to get what they want. I'm not trying to frighten you. I'm trying to make sure you're thinking clearly." Ethan stared at her. Something was moving behind his eyes that she couldn't name: anger and calculation and something else, something that hadn't quite surfaced yet. "You always like this," he said finally. "Like what?" Straight through to the bone with no wasted words. "Generally," she said. She stood and pushed the plate closer to him. "Eat your lunch. The stew's better when it's hot." He looked at the plate. He looked at her. He picked up his fork. She went back to the kitchen and told herself very firmly that the thing in his expression when she'd said, "I'm trying to make sure you're thinking clearly," was not her business, and was certainly not something she needed to turn over in her mind like a river stone she'd found interesting. She turned it over anyway. May found her that evening on the back step. Cora had come out after the girls were in bed to sit with the cooling air and the stars, which were extraordinary up here, dense and low and startlingly bright in a way that never happened in towns where the lamplight fought them back. She heard May's step in the doorway and moved over without being asked. May sat down beside her. For a while, neither of them said anything. "You're not scared of Pa?" May said finally. "Should I be?" May thought about it seriously, which Cora was coming to understand was just how May did things she didn't perform, thinking she actually did it. Mrs. Fenton was scared of him before anything happened, May said. She was scared of how he looked and how quiet he was and how sometimes he'd stop in the middle of something and just stand there like he'd forgotten where he was. She picked at the edge of her sleeve. "He does that because he's remembering. He ain't lost. He just gets stuck sometimes." "I know," Cora said. May looked at her sideways. "How do you know?" "Because I do it too," Cora said. May was quiet for a moment. Then very carefully, "What happened to you?" "My husband left when Nettie—" Cora stopped. Old reflex, old caution. She started again. "I was married a long time ago. He left. After that, things got hard for a while, and then harder, and then I found my way here." She kept her voice matter of fact. "Everyone's got a version of that story one way or another." "Pa's version is louder than most," May said. "Sometimes the loudest versions make the most noise because they're trying to drown out the quiet ones," Cora said. "The quiet ones are the ones that stick." May looked at her for a long moment. "I think," May said slowly, "that you're a lot smarter than Mrs. Fenton." "Mrs. Fenton might have been very smart," Cora said. "She just knew when to leave." "You're not going to leave." May said it not quite as a question. Cora looked at the stars, the great blazing wash of them, indifferent and magnificent. "Not unless I have a reason to," she said. May exhaled. It was a small sound, barely audible, but it carried the weight of something that had been held in for a long time. "Okay," she said. Just that. "Okay." But the word had a different quality than any word she'd spoken to Cora before. It had the quality of a door opening just a little, and the light coming through. Guy. The trouble with Ray Dobbins came to a head on the 7th day, and it came faster and harder than anyone had prepared for. Cora was in the kitchen when she heard the horses, more than one this time, coming up the trail in a way that said they weren't interested in being quiet about it. She moved to the window and saw 3 riders Dobbins in front and 2 men she didn't know on either side. Her heart hit her ribs once hard and then settled. She wiped her hands on her apron. "May," she said. May appeared from the back room. "Take Nettie out the back and go to the woodshed," Cora said. Her voice was calm and quiet and completely firm. "Both of you stay there until your father or I come to get you. Don't come out for any reason. Do you understand?" May read her face and asked no questions. She was already moving. Cora heard Ethan's boots on the porch before she heard the horses stop. He'd been outside already, must have heard them coming up the trail. When Dobbins and his men pulled up in the yard, Ethan was standing in the yard to meet them, arms at his sides, completely still, with that particular quality of stillness that is not the absence of action, but the deliberate withholding of it. Cora stepped out onto the porch. She didn't touch the doorframe. She stood straight apron on and watched. "Ethan?" Dobbins said. He didn't get down this time. "We're past the point of courtesy calls." "I know what we're past," Ethan said. "Then you know why I'm here." "Tell me anyway." Dobbins looked past Ethan to the porch to Cora. Something passed across his face. Reassessment calculation. "Sent you a message through your woman," he said. "You didn't answer. I take that as an answer, but I wanted to make sure we understood each other clear." "We're clear," Ethan said. "You sure about that?" The man on Dobbins' right shifted in his saddle, not casual pointed. "I said we're clear." Ethan's voice didn't rise. It dropped, if anything, which was worse. Dobbins studied him. "You're making a mistake." "I've made worse." "Not with stakes this high." Dobbins finally looked directly at Cora again. "Nice to see you again, Miss Jennings." The way he said her name, carefully, deliberately, like he'd looked it up, was a threat stated so plainly it didn't need any other dressing. Cora felt the heat of it, the specific cold heat of being told without words that someone has filed your name away for future use. She met his eyes and did not look away. "Good day, Mr. Dobbins," she said. Dobbins smiled, and it was not a friendly smile, and then he turned his horse and rode out with his men behind him. The yard was quiet. Ethan didn't move for a long moment. When he finally turned, his face was white underneath the tan, and his jaw was set so hard she could see the line of it from 15 feet away. "He used your name," Ethan said. He did. Ethan walked to the porch and stopped with his boot on the bottom step and looked up at her, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she saw something genuinely unguarded in his face. Not managed, not contained, just raw and visible, and too big for him to keep all the way inside. "I'm sorry," he said. "That wasn't, you shouldn't have been brought into this." "I'm already in it," Cora said. "Where are the girls?" "Woodshed." "Good." She held his gaze. "What are you going to do about Dobbins?" "I need to think." "Think fast," she said. "A man who brings 2 riders on a courtesy call is not planning to wait around while you consider your options." Ethan stared at her. The rawness in his face was still there, but something else had come into it, something steadier. "You're not scared," he said. It came out almost like an accusation, like it confounded him. "I'm terrified," Cora said plainly. "I'm just not showing it because your girls are 50 feet away, and they need to see that it's manageable. Is it manageable?" Ethan was quiet for 3 full seconds. "Yes," he said. And she believed him not because she was naive, but because she'd gotten good at reading the difference between a man who was lying to make you feel better and a man who was telling you the truth because he'd decided you could handle it. "Then go get your girls," she said. "And come inside, and we'll figure it out." He looked at her for one more moment, that unguarded, complicated look, and then he went. She stood on the porch alone in the mountain heat and breathed once slowly, and then she went inside to set another pot on the stove because supper still needed making and the world still needed managing, and that was the kind of woman she was. Hi. The girls were quieter at supper that evening. Even Nettie, which said something. After they ate and the dishes were done and the girls were tucked in with more than the usual number of questions about whether everything was all right. "Yes, everything is fine. Get some sleep." Cora came back out to the main room and found Ethan sitting at the kitchen table with a piece of paper in front of him and a pen he wasn't using. She sat down across from him. "Tell me what he wants exactly," she said. "All of it. Don't leave anything out because you think I can't manage it." Ethan looked at the paper. He looked at her, and then slowly, methodically, in the flat and honest voice of a man who had been carrying something too long to carry it much farther, he told her. The supply routes ran stolen mining equipment south through his land to a connect point near the border. 3 shipments already this year. What Dobbins wanted was Ethan's explicit cooperation. Unlocked gates, deliberate absence, silence after the fact. In exchange, the debt was cleared. In exchange, his name stayed off a list that had other men's names on it, men who had said no, men who had found their situations rapidly worsening, in ways that were hard to prove and impossible to fight. "He's blackmailing you," Cora said. "He's applying pressure," Ethan said. "He'd call it business." "What would you call it?" "The same thing you would." He sat back. "I've been stalling because I kept thinking there was a way out that didn't involve going to the law, because the law in Bisbee is complicated. Dobbins has reached there. Sheriff Prentice owes him money or favors or both, and I got no way to know which." "Is there law that doesn't go through Prentice?" Ethan was quiet. "There's a federal marshal out of Tucson," he said slowly. "Name of Garrett. I met him once 2 years back. He was straight. The kind of straight that holds even when it's inconvenient." He paused. "But going to Garrett means this gets big. It means Dobbins finds out I moved on him before I have any protection set up. There's a window between the moment I send word and the moment Garrett arrives where things could go very badly." Cora looked at the table. She looked at the pen Ethan wasn't using. "How wide is that window?" she asked. "Week, maybe 2. She nodded. She didn't say anything right away. She just turned it over in her mind, all of it, the angles of it, the risks, the specific shape of what they were actually dealing with. "You'd need to get the girls somewhere safe first," she said. Ethan went very still. "What, if Dobbins suspects you've reached out to Garrett and he wants to apply pressure?" Cora met his eyes. "The girls are the pressure point. You know that. I said it 4 days ago." The rawness was back in his face harder this time. "I'll send word to my sister in Flagstaff," he said. It came out clipped, controlled. "She can take them for a few weeks." "And me," Cora said. Ethan stared at her. "I can carry the letter to Garrett," she said. "A woman traveling alone draws different attention than a man. Dobbins will watch for you. He won't watch for me." She kept her voice level. "I rode into Bisbee alone. I can ride to Tucson alone." "That's a 2-day ride." "I know. Through open country." "I know that too." Ethan pushed back from the table and stood, which seemed to be what he did when an emotion was too large for him to manage sitting still. He walked to the window and put his hand on the frame and stood there with his back to her. "You've been here a week," he said. It wasn't angry. It was almost the opposite. Something low and rough and bewildered, like a man being asked to trust something he hasn't trusted in so long he's forgotten how. "I know how long I've been here," Cora said. "I hired you to cook and keep the house," he said. "Not to—" He stopped. "I'm aware," she said. "I'm offering." The silence stretched long enough that she started to believe he wouldn't answer. The lamp threw a warm, uneven light across the room, and outside the mountain dark was absolute and enormous. "Why?" he said finally. He was still at the window. "Why would you do that?" Cora looked at the 2 small braids on the back of May's chair, where Nettie had left them after playing. She looked at the cold fireplace and the rocking chair she hadn't touched. She looked at the pen that Ethan had been holding but not using, and she thought about a man who hadn't been able to write the letter himself, and a woman who was good at doing difficult things without flinching. "Because your daughters are in that room," she said quietly. "And they're good girls, and they deserve to stay that way. And because somebody has to." Ethan was very still. "That's it," he said. "That's enough," she said. He turned around. She could see his face in the lamplight now, all that complicated, unguarded something more of it than he probably wanted her to see, and less than he was actually feeling. And she looked at it without looking away. "Get some sleep," she said, standing. "Write the letter in the morning. I'll leave at first light while the trail's still cool." She walked past him toward the back room. "Cora." She stopped but didn't turn around. "Thank you," he said. And he said it the same way he'd said it that first night in Bisbee, like he meant every syllable of it, like the words cost him something real. She stood in the doorway for a moment. "Get some sleep, Ethan," she said, and went to bed. She left before Ethan's daughters were awake. That was deliberate. Goodbyes with Nettie would have taken 20 minutes and involved tears, and 20 minutes in the wrong direction, when you were trying to outrun a man like Ray Dobbins, was not a luxury Cora could afford. She'd tucked the letter into the inside of her jacket. Ethan had written it the night before, tight and careful, and addressed to Marshal J.T. Garrett, Federal District, Tucson, and she'd taken the better of the 2 horses and the money Ethan pressed into her hand without looking at her while he did it. "There's a relay station at Pima Crossing," he'd said. "Day's ride south. They'll give you a fresh horse." "I know how relay stations work," she said. He'd looked at her then, that same look, heavy and careful and trying to say something he didn't have the language for yet. "Ride wide around Bisbee," he said. "If Dobbins has men watching the south road—" "I'll go east first and cut south after the canyon," she said. "I've been thinking about it." He was quiet for a moment. "Be careful," he said. It was not a complicated thing to say, but the way he said it was. She rode out into the dark blue pre-dawn and didn't look back because looking back was not going to help anyone, least of all herself. Sank. The first 2 hours were uneventful, which she knew better than to find reassuring. She pushed the horse steadily, not fast enough to tire him, but not slow enough to feel safe, keeping to the eastern track that ran through dry scrub and broken rock before bending south toward the open flats. The sun came up behind her and turned the ground ahead the color of rust, and for a long time the only sounds were hoofbeats and wind and the occasional call of something small and alarmed in the brush. She was halfway to Pima Crossing when she heard the second set of hoofbeats. She didn't react visibly. She adjusted her grip on the reins, kept her pace, and moved her eyes without moving her head to check the ground behind and to her right. The sound was coming from the east, parallel to her, not closing yet, but close enough to hear. Someone was tracking her. Her mouth went dry. Her heart did not speed up, which surprised her slightly, and then didn't, because fear, she'd learned, was not always fast. Sometimes it was very still and cold and focused. She didn't stop. Stopping was the worst thing she could do. She kept moving south, kept her eyes ahead, and thought. If it was one of Dobbins' men, stopping to confront him was wrong. Running would confirm she had something worth chasing. Her best option was the same thing she'd done in Bisbee with Dobbins himself, face it directly without showing what was underneath. She pulled up her horse. She turned in the saddle and looked at the rider coming up on her eastern flank and recognized neither the man nor his horse. He was young, mid-20s maybe, with a plain face and a working man's clothes, and an expression that was careful in the way of someone who's been told to be careful. "Morning," he said. "Morning," Cora said. "Long way from town," he said. "I'm going to Tucson," she said. "Family business." He looked at her saddlebag. "That all you're carrying?" "What else would I be carrying?" He had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "Mr. Dobbins asked me to check on any travelers heading south this morning. Just routine." "Routine," she said, flat as a plank. "Yes, ma'am." "Your employer is in the habit of having women followed on public roads." The discomfort increased. He was young enough that his face still showed things it hadn't learned to hide. "Ma'am, I'm just—" "Tell Mr. Dobbins I said good morning," Cora said, and turned her horse south and rode on. She didn't look back again, but she listened hard, and after about 30 seconds, she heard him turn and ride east back toward town, and not south after her. She exhaled very slowly through her nose and kept riding. One thing was now certain: Dobbins knew she'd left. Which meant he knew something was moving. Which meant whatever time they'd had before this started shrinking, it was shrinking faster now. Bang! She made Pima Crossing by mid-afternoon, got a fresh horse, drank 2 cups of bitter coffee, and was back on the south road within 20 minutes. The relay man, a weathered and curious soul who asked no questions, which she appreciated, watched her ride out with the expression of a man who'd seen too many things on this road to be surprised by any of them. The second day's ride was harder. Not physically, the new horse was steady and the road was open, but in the specific wearing way that long stretches of empty time are hard when you've left something unresolved behind you. She found herself calculating. The girls should be on their way to Flagstaff by now. Ethan had planned to take them himself quickly and be back at the cabin before Dobbins had reason to move. If everything had gone as planned, the cabin would be empty and quiet. If everything had gone as planned. She'd learned long ago that if everything goes as planned was the sentence most often followed by it didn't. She pushed the thought aside, focused on the road, and rode. She reached Tucson on the afternoon of the second day, found the federal marshal's office on a side street off the main plaza, and walked in with the letter before she'd taken the time to eat or rest or do anything except water the horse, because some things were more urgent than her own comfort, and she'd always known how to prioritize. Marshal Garrett was a lean man in his 50s with gray in his mustache and the kind of unhurried attention in his eyes that came from years of learning to listen before he spoke. He read the letter twice. He didn't say anything. He looked up. "You work for Carson," he said. "I do." "How long?" 8 days. Something moved in his face that might have been a smile. 8 days and you rode 2 days through open country to deliver this. The situation didn't leave a lot of time for hesitation, Cora said. Garrett looked at the letter again. "Dobbins," he said. "We've had our eye on that operation for 8 months. Getting Carson's testimony puts a name on the supply routes that we haven't been able to confirm." He set the letter down. "This is useful, Miss Jennings, very useful." He looked at her. "You understand that once I ride north, Dobbins is going to know immediately." "I know. Your employer is going to be in a difficult position in the window between now and when we arrive." "I know that too," Cora said. "That's why I need to get back ahead of you." Garrett looked at her for a long, considering moment. "How fast can you ride?" "Faster than I came," she said. Dag. She was back on the road north within the hour. Garrett and 2 deputies were riding at first light the following morning, which gave her a head start, and the specific cold comfort of knowing help was coming, even if it was coming slowly. The ride back was brutal. She pushed harder than was wise and knew it and didn't stop. The light on the second morning was still gray when she came over the ridge that gave the first long view down toward the valley where the Bisbee Road ran, and that was when she saw the smoke. Not the smoke from a chimney. The wrong kind of smoke. The black, greasy kind. Her hands tightened on the reins. Her stomach dropped straight through the ground. It was coming from the direction of Ethan's trail. She rode the last 2 hours at a dead run. The cabin was standing. She almost sobbed when she saw it still whole, still solid, the chimney intact, and the woodpile untouched. And then she registered the other details. The front door open. Ethan's horse in the yard, breathing hard. A man she didn't know sitting on the ground against the fence post with his hat in his hands, and an expression that said he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. And Ethan himself on the porch, and the set of his body tense coiled turned towards something inside told her everything she needed to know about the state of things before she even dismounted. "Ethan." She was off the horse before it fully stopped. He turned. The relief on his face was fast and genuine, and then immediately replaced by something harder. "The girls didn't go," he said. The words hit her like cold water. "What? I took them to Bisbee to meet the stage for Flagstaff." His voice was clipped and tight, each word controlled. "Dobbins had men at the station. They knew. They let May and Nettie board, and then one of his men pulled me aside and told me if I sent any word south, the girls wouldn't make it to Flagstaff." Cora stared at him. "They threatened them on the stage. They've got a man riding it." His jaw was iron. "I sent a rider after it 2 hours ago to try to intercept. I don't know if he made it." The ground shifted under her in a way that had nothing to do with balance. "Dobbins is inside," Ethan said. "He came himself, 20 minutes ago." His eyes moved over her face, reading her, assessing. Doing that fast and complete calculation she'd seen him do before. "He wants me to tell him what I sent south. He doesn't know about Garrett yet. He just knows you left." "What did you tell him?" "Nothing yet." A beat. "He's waiting." Cora looked at the open door. She looked at the man by the fence post who kept his eyes down. She looked at Ethan's face, white and hard and carrying more weight than it should have to carry. "How many men does he have with him?" she asked. "2 inside, 1 in the yard." "Is he armed?" "Always." She thought fast. Garrett was 2 days out. The rider Ethan had sent after the stage might or might not have reached it. Dobbins was inside waiting, holding the fact of the girls like a card he hadn't fully played yet. "Let me go in," she said. "Cora." He doesn't know what I sent or who I sent it to. He doesn't know Garrett's coming. What he knows is that I'm a woman who works for you and left for 2 days. I can work with that." She kept her voice low and level. "If you go in there, it becomes a test of wills between two men and somebody gets hurt. Let me go in first." Ethan looked at her with something that was beyond argument, past it, past everything he might have said, stranded in a place where he couldn't see a better option and was having a hard time making peace with this one. "You come in 3 minutes after me," she said. "Just stand in the door and let me work." Cora. He said her name differently than he had before, not as a caution or a thank you or a function. Just her name. Just that. 3 minutes, she said, and walked inside. Oh. Dobbins was sitting at her kitchen table. He'd made himself coffee, which she found she minded more than she probably should have. He looked up when she came in, and the two wide smiles spread across his face in a way that was almost satisfied, like she'd confirmed something he'd expected. "Miss Jennings," he said. "Productive trip." "Family business," she said. She moved to the kitchen side of the table and poured herself a cup of coffee, without being invited to, because sitting across from this man with nothing in her hands was not how she wanted to do this. Sure it was. He leaned back in his chair. "Funny thing about family business, it usually takes longer than 2 days. Unless what you're doing doesn't have much to do with family." "What do you want, Mr. Dobbins?" "I want to know who you talked to in Tucson." "I told you, family." "You got family in Tucson." "My cousin, Maggie Dent. She's on Mesquite Street if you'd like to verify it." She watched him process that. She watched him decide whether she was lying or telling the truth and arrive at uncertainty, which was exactly where she wanted him. "Even if that's true," he said, "Ethan sent you for a reason, and I'd like to know what it was." "Ethan sent me because I offered to go," she said. "He doesn't know what I did or didn't do while I was there. I work for him. He doesn't own me." Dobbins looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were flat and not unintelligent, and she could feel him pushing at the edges of what she'd said, looking for the place where it gave. "You know what I think," he said. "I imagine you'll tell me." "I think you're braver than you are smart," he said. "I think you went to Tucson and did something you think is going to fix this situation, and I think you came back feeling like you did the right thing, and I think you haven't thought through what happens to the people in this house between now and when your fix arrives." He picked up his coffee. "If a fix is coming at all." "The people in this house," Cora said, "include 2 little girls on a stage to Flagstaff." "That's right." She looked at him. Her voice was quiet and very clear. "If anything happens to those girls, Mr. Dobbins, there is nothing, not geography, not money, not connections, not the reach you've built in Bisbee, that will keep what you've done from being known exactly and completely. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Dobbins set his cup down. For the first time, the smile was fully gone. "You threatening me, Miss Jennings?" "I'm clarifying," she said. "You came here to make things clear. I'm making them clear for both of us." The silence in the kitchen was absolute. She heard Ethan's step on the porch. He came through the door and stopped just inside it the way she'd asked, and said nothing. Just stood there with the door frame behind him and his dark eyes moving between Cora and Dobbins with an expression that was carefully, deliberately blank. Dobbins looked at him, looked at Cora, looked at him again, and she watched something happen in his face. The calculus of it, the rapid and private reassessment as he arrived at the realization that the situation he'd ridden into was not the situation he'd assumed it was. That there was something in this kitchen between these two people that he had not accounted for. He stood, slowly. "We'll call this a conversation," he said. "Not a conclusion." "That's fine," Ethan said. Dobbins looked at Cora one more time. Something in his expression had shifted. Not fear exactly, but the precursor to it the moment just before a man starts being careful. "Pleasure, Miss Jennings," he said. "Good day," she said. He walked out. "Matar." The sound of hoofbeats faded. Ethan crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and looked at her. looked at her face, checking the same way he'd checked his daughter's that first night in Bisbee, that fast assessing look, and something about the familiarity of it hit her, somewhere she hadn't expected. "You all right?" he said. "Yes." She set her coffee cup down. Her hands were steady, which she noted and was grateful for. "He doesn't know about Garrett. Not yet." "He'll find out. He'll find out when Garrett rides into Bisbee," she said, "which is in 2 days. Maybe less if they push." Ethan put his hands on the back of a kitchen chair and stood there, not sitting, just holding on to it. She could see him processing, working through the timeline, the variables, the things that could still go wrong. "The rider I sent after the stage," he said. "If he didn't make it, he made it." She said it with more certainty than she had, because she'd decided this was the moment for certainty. Ethan looked at her. "How do you know?" he asked. "I don't," she said. "But I believe it, and right now, that's what we've got." He stared at her. The thing in his face was doing it again, that complicated, unguarded work that she'd learned to recognize but still couldn't entirely name. "You walked in there," he said. "You walked into a room with a man like that and you—" "I talked to him," she said. "That's all." "That's not all," Ethan said. His voice had lost its controlled flatness. Just slightly. Just enough. "Cora, that's not all it was, and you know it." She looked at him. She let herself look fully for the first time since she'd arrived, not the careful sidelong attention of someone learning a new place, but the direct, steady look of someone who has stopped managing the distance. "I know," she said quietly. The kitchen was very still. Ethan let go of the chair. He straightened, and he was closer than he'd been in any of the 10 days since she'd come here, and she could see everything in his face now. All of it. None of it managed. The grief in there, and the stubborn endurance of it, and underneath that, something older and more resilient, something that had been waiting without quite knowing it was waiting. "I don't know how to—" He stopped. "You don't have to know how to do anything right now," she said. "We just need to get through the next 2 days. And after 2 days—" She held his gaze. "Let's get there first." He nodded once. Then he stepped back, and the moment, whatever it had been, whatever it was becoming, pulled back with him like a tide going out, leaving the shore changed in ways that would take time to inventory. "I'll go to the road," he said. "Watch for any riders from Bisbee." "I'll start supper," she said. He picked up his hat. He was almost to the door when he stopped, his back to her. "For what it's worth," he said to the doorframe to the outside, to some point in the middle distance that was easier to address than her face. "What you did in Tucson. What you did just now." He paused. Martha would have done the same thing. The name landed the way it always did, weighted, reverent, slightly painful in the way that love always is when it lives on the far side of loss. Cora stood very still. "That's a fine thing to say," she said carefully. "I mean it as one," he said, and then he walked out. She stood in the kitchen for a long moment after the door closed. She stood there and let the day settle onto her, the ride, the smoke, Dobbins at her table. Ethan's face just now, and she thought about a rocking chair she'd been careful not to touch, and a woman in a photograph who'd been loved well and lost hard. She'd known what she was walking into when she came here. She'd known there was a ghost in this house. She'd known that grief was not something you competed with, or moved around, or waited patiently for to be done. She'd known all of that. She hadn't known quite that she would come to care about the people carrying it. She put a pot on the stove and started cooking. The rider came at dusk. Not Dobbins' man. Not a threat. A young boy from Bisbee, hard-ridden and dusty, who arrived at the yard gate and called for Ethan in the voice of someone who'd been told this was urgent and had taken that seriously. Ethan came from the barn. Cora came from the porch. They reached the gate at the same time. "Message from the stage relay at Cottonwood Fork," the boy said, pulling a folded paper from his shirt. "Came through a couple hours ago. Asked to get it to Mr. Carson at this address." Ethan took it and opened it. His face in the last light was unreadable. He read it twice, which he always did. She'd noticed that about him, the habit of double-checking, and then he looked up. "The stage stopped at Cottonwood Fork," he said. His voice was strange. Not bad strange, the other kind. "Your rider reached it. The man of Dobbins got off the stage there voluntarily, said his plans had changed." He paused. "The girls are fine. They're still on the stage." The breath she hadn't known she was holding came out of her slowly. "They'll reach Flagstaff by tomorrow morning," Ethan said. He folded the paper and put it in his pocket. He looked at the boy. "What do I owe you?" "Nothing, sir. Man at the relay said Mr. Carson would know what it was worth." Ethan reached in his pocket and gave the boy twice what it was worth, and the boy rode off satisfied, and they stood at the gate in the falling dark. "They're safe," Ethan said, like he was checking the word against something. "They're safe," Cora said. He exhaled. It was not a sound she'd heard from him before, not controlled, not measured, just the raw sound of a man releasing something he'd been holding with both hands for hours. He put one hand on the top of the gatepost and dropped his head slightly and breathed. She didn't touch him. She just stood close enough that he knew she was there, which was sometimes the only thing that helped, and she'd learned long ago the difference between help that was wanted and help that needed to be asked for. After a moment, he straightened. He looked at her. "Garrett's still 2 days out," he said. "Dobbins is going to move before then. He knows the window." "Yes," she said. "We're going to need to be careful." "Yes." He looked at her face in the near dark. "You're not afraid," he said. "I'm afraid," she said. "I'm just not letting it make decisions for me." Ethan was quiet. Then he said, "The first night in Bisbee, when I saw you with my girls." He stopped, started again. "You looked like someone who knew how to sit with people who were hurting. Not fix it, just sit with it." Cora waited. "I haven't had someone—" He stopped again. His jaw moved. "I've been out here long enough that I'd started thinking I didn't need anyone to." "And now," she said. He looked at her. And in his eyes, underneath all the complicated, unguarded, everything was something very simple and very clear and very difficult, in the way that true things are often difficult, not because they're wrong, but because they ask something of you. "Now I'm less sure," he said. She held his gaze. "That's a start," she said quietly. They stood at the gate in the dark, and from somewhere in the deep pines above them came the thin, pure sound of a night bird calling. And neither of them moved for a long time, and the night came down full and final and absolute around them, and the mountains were enormous and quiet and very still, and then Dobbins' riders crested the north ridge. 3 lanterns moving in the dark, fast and deliberate, heading directly toward the cabin, and the sound of hooves on dry ground carrying sharp and clear through the night air. Ethan turned. His hand moved to his side automatically, the reflex of a man who'd lived long enough in hard country to have developed instincts that moved faster than thought. "Inside," he said. "How many?" Cora was already moving. 3 lanterns. Could be more without lights." He was right behind her. "There's a rifle above the door, loaded. You know how to use it." "Yes," she said. "Then get it." She got it, and the riders came on through the dark, and the cabin sat quiet and solid and lit against the night, and inside it, Cora Jennings stood with a rifle she knew how to use, and a man she was beginning to know how to trust, and neither of them flinched, and neither of them ran. And the mountain held its breath around them like it was waiting to see what these 2 people were made of. The first rider reached the yard gate and pulled up. "Carson." Dobbins' voice. Hard and stripped of all the pleasantness, now nothing left but the core of him. "Come out, we're done being patient." Ethan looked at Cora. She looked at him. "Ready?" he said. "I've been ready since Bisbee," she said. And he opened the door. Dobbins was off his horse before Ethan cleared the bottom step. That was the first thing, the speed of him, the purposefulness, the way he moved like a man who'd spent the ride over deciding exactly how this was going to go, and had committed to it completely. The 2 riders behind him stayed mounted, which was worse in some ways than if they'd dismounted because men on horses in the dark were harder to read and harder to account for. "You should have stayed inside," Dobbins said. "You came to my yard," Ethan said. "I'm going to stand in it." Dobbins stopped 10 feet out. His eyes moved past Ethan to the door, and Cora saw the exact moment he registered her standing in the doorframe with the rifle, because his posture shifted just slightly, just enough in the way of a man recalculating. "That's an interesting decision," he said, to her. "It's a practical one," she said. Dobbins looked back at Ethan. The pleasantness was completely gone now, stripped down to something harder and more honest, which in its own way was almost better. At least she knew exactly what she was dealing with. "You reached out to someone," Dobbins said. "I don't know exactly who yet, but riders don't come back from Tucson in 2 days without a reason, and my man got off that stage for a reason too, and I'm not a man who likes being managed." He looked at Ethan. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me who you talked to, and we're going to figure out how to fix it, and this gets resolved tonight. Or what?" Ethan said. Dobbins was quiet for one beat. "Or things get harder." "Things can get harder," Ethan said. "That ain't a new experience for me." "Your girls are in Flagstaff," Dobbins said. It was not a threat technically. It was just a piece of information delivered with precision, and the precision was the threat. "Things can be hard in Flagstaff too." The silence that followed was the kind that had physical weight. Cora watched Ethan's hands. She'd learned his hands in 10 days, learned the way they went still when he was managing something, the way they moved when he wasn't. Right now, they were very still, which told her everything. "Say that again," Ethan said, very quiet. Dobbins read the quiet correctly. He took a half step back. "I'm saying, I heard what you said." Ethan took one step forward, just one slow and deliberate. "I want to make sure you meant it." "Ethan," Cora's voice from the doorway. Not a warning, just his name. He stopped. He didn't look at her, but he stopped, which told her something important about the nature of what had been building between them without either of them naming it. Dobbins looked at her again, back at Ethan. The calculation was working behind his eyes. "You went to Garrett," he said. And the way he said it told her he'd just decided it right now. Not because he had evidence, but because the shape of everything added up, and he was smart enough to do the math. "The federal marshal. That's who you sent her to." Ethan said nothing. Dobbins exhaled slowly. "When does he arrive?" "Could be already in Bisbee," Cora said. "Could be tomorrow. Could be he was closer than Tucson to start with." It was a bluff. Partial anyway. But she watched it land, watched Dobbins absorb it, watched him look at the two riders behind him and understand that the equation had changed. "You've got two riders," Ethan said. "I've got a rifle pointed at your chest and a woman behind me who I've seen do harder things in the last 10 days than anything you've brought to this yard tonight." He paused. "Go home, Ray." It was the first time she'd heard him use Dobbins' first name. It came out not like contempt and not like familiarity. It came out like something being laid down. Finished. Dobbins stood in the yard for a long moment. She could hear him breathing. She could almost hear him thinking which was the more dangerous sound. Then he looked at her one long final look that she met without blinking, and something in his face shifted into something she recognized as the specific expression of a man who knows he's lost a round but is deciding whether it's the match. He turned and walked back to his horse. "This ain't over," he said, mounting. "I know," Ethan said. "But tonight it is." Dobbins rode out. His two riders fell in behind him, and the lanterns moved back up the north ridge and disappeared into the dark, and the yard was quiet. The quiet lasted about 4 seconds before Cora's legs informed her that they were done. Holding her up with the same conviction they'd managed over the last 3 minutes, and she sat down on the top porch step with the rifle across her knees and breathed. Ethan turned. He looked at her sitting there, and something moved across his face that was almost amusement and almost something else entirely. "You all right?" he said. "Wonderful," she said. He sat down on the step beside her, not at a polite distance. Close the way you sit beside someone when the careful management of space has stopped being a priority. He'll go to Bisbee, he said. Try to figure out where Garrett is. If he can't get a clear answer, he'll wait and see. And if he can, if he finds out Garrett's still a day out, he might make another move. Ethan's jaw was set. But he'll be thinking now about whether it's worth it. A man like Dobbins doesn't take risks he can't calculate. We've made him uncertain. Uncertain men sit still more than they move. Cora looked at the rifle in her hands. For a man who doesn't say much, you say useful things when you do. He looked at her sideways. It was dark and she couldn't fully read his expression, but the quality of his silence had changed, less guarded, more open like a window. Someone had finally gotten around to unsticking. You said you were afraid, he said. I was. Didn't show. I know. She turned the rifle over in her hands. My mother used to say that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was just deciding that the thing in front of you matters more than the fear does. Smart woman. She had her moments. Cora was quiet for a second. She also said that a woman who shows a man her fear gives him something to use against her. She was practical about it. Ethan was quiet. She felt him thinking beside her, that specific careful quality of his thinking. That sounds lonely, he said finally. She hadn't expected that. She felt the accuracy of it hit somewhere she hadn't been expecting to be hit. It was, she said. Is. She paused. I've been managing alone long enough that I'm not entirely sure I remember how to do it differently. I know that feeling, he said. I know you do. They sat with that for a moment. The night was enormous around them. The stars the same blazing wash she'd looked at her first night in this house, and the mountains were dark and solid and indifferent. And it was quiet enough that she could hear the horses in the barn shifting. Tell me about Martha, she said. She felt him go still. You don't have to, she said. I'm not asking to pry. I'm asking because she's in this house and the girls carry her, and I've been learning around her edges for 10 days, and I'd rather know. He was quiet for so long that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, she was from Pennsylvania, came west with her family when she was 16. I met her in Flagstaff, which is funny now considering. He stopped, started again. She wanted to come up here, to the mountains. That was her. She saw this land, and she wanted to be in the middle of it. His voice was careful and flat, in the way of something being held very steady because it can't afford to shake. She was the one who planted the garden. She was the one who found the cabin site. She was the one who convinced me that living this far from town was a choice worth making. A beat. She was right about most things. What happened? Cora asked. Fever, he said. Winter before last. It came fast and it didn't leave room for much. He was quiet. The girls were 7 and 9. May held it together better than I did. Cora said nothing. She let it sit where he'd put it. I said her name to you, he said. In there, when I compared you. You did. I shouldn't have. Why not? Cora said carefully. It was meant well. It wasn't fair to either of you. He turned and looked at her directly, and even in the dark, she could see the work happening in his face. You're not her. You're... He stopped. Different. In good ways. Different isn't a lesser thing, she said. I know that, he said. I'm learning that. The honesty of it, plain and unglamorous and real, landed somewhere in her chest and stayed. Ethan, she said, when this is over, when Garrett comes and the Dobbins situation is resolved, you don't owe me anything. I came here for work. Whatever happens between now and then doesn't change the terms of employment. He looked at her. Is that what you think I'm worried about? I think you're a careful man, she said. I think you've been hurt badly enough that careful feels like the only safe way to be. And you, he said. Your husband left. You said it was worse than dying. I said sometimes. Is this sometimes? She looked at him. The directness of the question surprised her. It was more direct than anything he'd said to her since she arrived, and it told her something about what the last hour had cost him in terms of reserves. "No," she said. "This is not that sometimes." He held her gaze. Something in his face settled very slightly like a weight finding its center. "Okay," he said. Exactly the way May had said it to her on the back step, with the same quality, a door opening just enough for light to come through. They slept in shifts, not because they'd agreed to exactly, but because neither of them was going to sleep soundly with Dobbins possibly reconsidering in Bisbee, and this seemed to both of them like an obvious solution that didn't require discussion. Ethan took the first half of the night, and Cora sat at the kitchen table with coffee and the rifle and the absolute mountain silence, and she thought about $7.40 and a storekeeper dropping her coin on the floor. She thought about a bench outside a surveyor's office and 60 seconds of feeling the weight of things before standing up. She thought about two little girls in the failing evening light, one of them crying quietly, and one of them with her arm around her like she'd been doing it her whole life. She thought about the specific way Ethan had said her name tonight, 3 times, each time differently, and she thought about the rocking chair she still hadn't touched, and the woman in the photograph on the mantel, and she thought about the garden outside that still had good bones underneath the weeds. Things worth tending. She woke Ethan at 3 and went to bed, and was asleep in minutes, which she found out later was something he'd noted, the fact that she could do that, close her eyes in the middle of something unresolved, and simply sleep, because it was a capacity he'd lost after Martha and hadn't found again. Mike. Garrett arrived the next afternoon. Not from the south the way she'd expected, but from the east, which meant he'd moved faster than she'd calculated and taken the Cottonwood Fork cutoff that cut half a day off the Tucson road. He rode with 4 deputies, not 2, and they came in at a pace that said they already had information she didn't. Ethan went out to meet them. Cora stood on the porch. Garrett swung down and shook Ethan's hand, and then looked at Cora with those unhurried, attentive eyes. "Miss Jennings," he said. "Marshall," she said. "You made good time. We had reason to." He looked at Ethan. "Dobbins moved this morning. Tried to clear out a supply depot 2 miles east of Bisbee before we arrived. We had a man watching it." He said it without drama, the way a man delivers information when the drama has already happened somewhere else. "He's in custody. Rode him down at the depot." The silence that followed had a different quality than all the other silences of the last 2 days. This one was the silence of something being finished. Ethan put his hand on the fence post. Just rested it there, not gripping, just touching. She watched his shoulders drop a fraction of an inch, the specific physical release of something that had been held for months. "His men?" Ethan asked. 3 arrested, 2 ran. We'll find them." Garrett looked at Cora. "Your letter gave us the foundation we needed. Carson's testimony will complete it." He paused. "This is going to take some time through the courts. His reach in Bisbee may make things uncomfortable for a while." "We've managed uncomfortable," Cora said. Garrett looked at her for a moment with something that was professional respect wearing informal clothes. "I expect you have," he said. He went inside with Ethan to take the formal statement, and Cora sat back down on the porch step with the sun on her face and the rifle propped against the wall beside her, because old habits take a while to stand down. And she let herself feel it, all of it. The full accumulated weight of the last 2 days, the fear and the writing, and Dobbins at her kitchen table, and the night on the step, and Ethan's voice saying different in good ways. Let herself feel it without managing it, which was a luxury she rarely allowed herself, and decided just this once she'd earned. She was still sitting there when Garrett and his men rode out an hour later. Ethan came out and sat beside her in the same spot as last night, and they watched the deputy's dust settle on the south trail. "It's done," he said. "The legal part," she said. "The legal part," he agreed. "The rest takes longer. Things that matter usually do." He looked at her. The afternoon light was different from the dark. She could see his face clearly, all of it, and he wasn't hiding anything right now. She didn't think he was capable of hiding much from her at this point, and she suspected the feeling was mutual, which was the most frightening and the most steadying thing she'd encountered in a long time. "Your girls come home tomorrow," she said. "Yes." "Nettie's going to have 1,000 questions." Something happened to his face. The thing that was almost a smile but had never fully arrived, she'd been watching for it for 10 days, came closer than it had ever come, stopped just short, backed off. "She always does," he said. "May's going to want to know everything," Cora said. "Every detail. She'll ask it sideways the way she does, but she'll want all of it." "Yes." He paused. "She's a lot like her mother." Cora looked at him. He was looking at the trail at the settling dust. "Is that hard?" she asked. "To see?" He thought about it in the careful, honest way that was entirely his. "It used to be," he said. "It's getting less so." He looked at her. "Things change, without your permission sometimes. You wake up one day, and something that was only pain has got something else in it." "What else?" He was quiet for a moment. "Gratitude, maybe," he said. "That it happened at all." Cora felt those words move through her the way cold water moves through a hand, slowly, fully reaching every part. "That's a good way to get there," she said. "Took long enough." "Most good things do." He looked at her for a long time. She looked back. "Cora," he said, "I need to ask you something." "All right, stay." He said it simply without dressing. "Not as the housekeeper, or not only. I'm saying this badly." He stopped and started again with the particular effort of a man for whom words are not the natural element, but who has decided the situation requires them anyway. "I ain't asking for anything you don't want to give. I'm just asking you not to leave. Not yet. Give this." He gestured not at the cabin or the yard, but at something between them, something that had been building since Bisbee, since a bench in the dark, and a biscuit shared in silence. Give it room to be what it might be. She looked at him. At this man with his grief and his daughters and his solid, careful hands, and the thing behind his eyes that was not fully light yet, but was getting there. She thought about 60 seconds on a bench outside a surveyor's office, letting herself feel the weight of things before standing up. She thought about a door she'd been standing in front of. "I already told you," she said. "I'm not going anywhere unless I have a reason to." "And do you?" he said. "Have a reason." She held his gaze. "No," she said, "I don't." Ethan exhaled. It was the same sound as last night, that private, unguarded release, but quieter this time. Settled. He reached over and put his hand over hers, where it rested on her knee. Not dramatically, not urgently. Just placed it there, the way you place something you mean to keep. She turned her hand over and let his fingers close around it. They sat there in the afternoon sun, the mountain enormous and quiet around them, and neither of them said anything, and neither of them needed to, and for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, Cora Jennings sat still without bracing for what was coming next. Just still. Just here. Just this. The dog came around the side of the cabin and settled heavily at their feet, with the supreme indifference of the very old and the very fat. And that was somehow the most human thing about all of it. The ordinary, undramatic arrival of something warm and alive, filling up the quiet in the best possible way. Ethan looked down at the dog, then at her. "I'm sorry about the way I looked when you first arrived," he said. She frowned. "What do you mean? I know I ain't easy to read." A beat. "Or be around. Mrs. Fenton wasn't the first one to—" "Ethan," she said, "I'm still here." He looked at her. "I know," he said. And the way he said it, like it was still slightly surprising, like the fact of it had not yet become ordinary enough to take for granted, was the most honest thing she'd heard from him yet. "Get used to it," she said. And for the first time since Cora Jennings had arrived at this mountain with a carpet bag and $6 and a cautious, cracked-open possibility of hope, Ethan Carson smiled. Not almost. Not close. Fully and completely, in the kind of way that had clearly been building behind everything else he'd shown her. Quiet and waiting and real. And it transformed his face so completely that she understood immediately why his daughters looked at him the way they did, with that specific reverent attention of people who have learned not to expect something beautiful and find it anyway. She didn't say anything about it. She just held his hand in the afternoon sun and let the mountains be enormous around them, and thought, there it is. The stage from Flagstaff came in at noon the following day. Ethan had the wagon ready before sunrise, which told Cora everything she needed to know about the state of his sleep. She'd heard him moving in the main room while it was still dark, heard the specific restless rhythm of a man who'd won something the night before, and was now sitting in the unfamiliar quiet of having nothing immediate left to fight. She got up and made coffee and brought him a cup without being asked, and he took it and said thank you. And they sat at the kitchen table in the dark and didn't talk much, which was its own kind of comfortable. "What are you going to tell them?" she asked when the gray was just beginning at the window. "The truth," he said. "The parts they're old enough to carry. May will want all of it. May always wants all of it." He turned the cup in his hands. "She handles it better than I'd like her to have to." "She's strong," Cora said. "You gave her that." He looked at her. "She got it from her mother." "She got it from both of you," Cora said. "The kind of strong that lasts doesn't come from one place." He was quiet. She watched him absorb that, not deflect it, not dismiss it, just take it in and let it settle somewhere it could do some good. "You ready to see them?" she asked. "I've been ready since the moment I put them on that stage." His voice was rough. "That was the worst thing I've done in 2 years, sending them away." "You did it to keep them safe." "I know why I did it. Still felt like—" He stopped. "Like I was failing them. Ethan." She waited until he looked at her. "You sent them somewhere safe because there was danger here. You faced the danger instead of running from it. You protected them without letting them see what protecting them cost you." She held his gaze. "That's not failing. That's what a good father does." He stared at her for a long moment. "How do you do that?" he said. "Do what?" "Say the exact thing." His voice was low. "Every time." She picked up her coffee cup. "Practice," she said. "Drink up. We've got a long ride to Bisbee." The town looked different in the morning than it had on the day she'd arrived. Or maybe she looked at it differently. Hard to separate the two after everything. The news about Dobbins had moved through Bisbee the way news always moved through small towns, fast, thorough, and with significant embellishment along the way. By the time Ethan's wagon rolled down Main Street, there were people who looked up with a different quality of attention than the one she'd encountered on her first afternoon here. Not all of them friendly. Some of the looks were complicated in the way that looks are complicated when a person has been benefiting from a corrupt arrangement and is now recalibrating but different. The careful blankness of a town that had learned to keep its head down was shifting slightly into something more uncertain and more honest. The storekeeper, the one who'd dropped her coin, was sweeping his front step when they passed. He looked at the wagon. He looked at Cora sitting beside Ethan on the seat. He looked away first. She didn't feel triumphant about it. She just noted it, filed it, and looked ahead. The stage was 10 minutes late, which was 10 minutes of Nettie's voice in Cora's memory, bright and relentless. "Do you have any children? Why not?" And 10 minutes of Ethan sitting very still beside her, with his hands on the wagon brake and his jaw set in the particular way of a man holding himself together through the specific anticipation of something he needs. Then the stage came in, and Nettie was off it before it fully stopped. She came across the station yard at a dead run and hit Ethan somewhere around the chest level, and he caught her and held her with both arms, and his eyes closed, and Cora looked away, because that moment was not hers. May came down the stage steps more slowly. She had her carpet bag and her careful expression, and the look of someone who had spent 2 days in Flagstaff being reassured that everything was fine, and had spent those same 2 days not entirely believing it. She looked at Cora. Cora looked at her. "He all right?" May asked. "He's right there," Cora said. "Ask him." May looked at her father, holding Nettie, looked at the set of his shoulders, looked at his face now that he'd opened his eyes again. She did her characteristic thorough assessment. "He looks better," May said. The surprise in her voice was slight but real. "He is better," Cora said. "Things got resolved." "Dobbins?" "In custody. Marshal Garrett's men took him yesterday." May absorbed this. Something in her face moved through relief and out the other side into something more complicated. Did Pa? She stopped. Was it bad before the marshal came? It was handled, Cora said. By you. By both of us. May looked at her for a long moment. Cora waited because she'd learned that May's silences were working silences, and interrupting them was a waste. I told Aunt Ruth about you, May said finally. Cora raised an eyebrow. What did you tell her? I said Pa hired a woman who wasn't scared of him. May's expression was still careful, still measured, but something underneath it was warm and definite. Aunt Ruth said that was the most interesting thing she'd heard about Pa in 2 years. Your Aunt Ruth sounds sensible. She is. May looked at her father again, at Nettie, still holding on at the whole picture of it. Then she looked back at Cora. Are you staying? Yes, Cora said. I'm staying. May nodded once. The warm, definite thing underneath her expression came up a little closer to the surface. Good, she said. And she walked over to her father, and he put one arm around her while still holding Nettie with the other. And the three of them stood there in the Bisbee stage yard in the summer heat. And Cora stood at a comfortable distance, and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time settle into place. Not her family. Not yet. Maybe not ever in the precise sense of that word. But something real and present and hers in the way that things become yours, not through blood or paperwork, but through the accumulation of choosing them day after day until the choice stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like a fact. The twist came 3 days later, and it came from a direction no one had anticipated. A letter arrived. It came with the Bisbee Post addressed to Cora Jennings in a handwriting she recognized immediately, the way you recognize certain things from your past without wanting to, without choosing to your body doing the identifying before your mind catches up. Her husband's handwriting. She stood in the main room of the cabin with the letter in her hands and said nothing for a full minute. Nettie was outside. May was in the back room reading. Ethan was at the barn. She was alone with the letter and the past it represented, and the specific cold rush of a wound she'd thought was scarred over, proving that it had more feeling in it than she'd credited. He'd found her through the Bisbee post office. He didn't explain how he'd always been resourceful about the things he wanted, and careless about the things he didn't, and she'd been one of the latter once. The letter was short. He was in Santa Fe. He'd heard she was in Arizona territory. He said he'd made mistakes and knew it, and wanted to talk. She read it twice. Then she set it on the kitchen table and went outside and found Ethan splitting wood behind the barn, and she stood there until he lowered the axe and looked at her, and he read her face immediately in the way he'd learned to read it. What happened? He said. She told him. All of it, not just the letter, but the full story she'd been carrying in the part of herself she kept most carefully managed. Her husband's name was Daniel Prentice, and he had left her in the spring of 1876, for reasons she'd spent months cataloging into something that made sense, and eventually given up on cataloging. He'd left owing money to people she'd then had to deal with. He'd left when she was... She paused, and then said it plainly because she'd decided a long time ago that the truth was less dangerous than the careful management of it. She'd been carrying his child when he left, and the child had come too early, and she'd been alone when it happened, and it had been the worst 6 months of her life. And she'd come out the other side of it by deciding that she was going to survive it, and she had, and she'd been surviving ever since. When she stopped talking, the yard was very quiet. Ethan had the axe at his side. He was looking at her with an expression she'd seen pieces of before, but never assembled like this, not pity, which she'd braced for, but something much more direct and much harder to deflect. I'm sorry, he said. Just that. Not decorated, not qualified. It was a long time ago, she said. Doesn't matter how long ago, he said. It's the kind of thing that stays. She looked at him. Yes, she said. It does. What are you going to do about the letter? She'd been carrying that question since the moment she set it on the table. I don't know yet. That's why I'm telling you. He looked at the axe in his hand, set it against the woodpile. He doesn't have any claim on you, he said carefully, legally or otherwise. I know that. Then whatever you decide? He stopped. She watched him work through something. Whatever you decide about the letter, it doesn't change anything here, not for me. She looked at him. You should know what you're... Cora. He said her name with a patience that was not soft. I lost my wife. You lost a child and a marriage, and a good portion of 2 years to surviving the aftermath. Neither one of us came here without a history. He held her gaze. I'm not keeping score. The rawness of her, the specific rawness that she'd managed so carefully and so long, pushed up close to the surface. She held it there, didn't hide it, let him see it, which was the hardest thing she'd done since she walked into her kitchen and faced Ray Dobbins. What if he comes? She said. Then he comes, Ethan said. And he finds out that things are different than when he left. Different how? He looked at her for a long moment. Because you're not alone anymore, he said. And because I'm considerably less, he considered his word manageable, than he probably expects the situation to be. Something in her chest cracked open in the best possible way. Is that so? She said. That's so. He picked the axe back up. Write back if you want. Don't if you don't. But don't let a letter from someone who doesn't deserve a line of your time take up space in this house. She looked at him for a moment. You know, she said, for a man who doesn't say much, you say useful things. You've said that before, he said. It keeps being true, she said. She went back inside. She picked up the letter. She held it for one more moment, feeling the weight of it, not the paperweight, the other kind, and then she put it in the kitchen stove and watched it go. It was May who noticed first. They were at supper 4 days later, the four of them, which had rapidly become the only way Cora thought about supper. Now the four of them at this table, and May looked up from her plate with her careful sidelong attention and said, You're different. She was looking at Ethan. Ethan looked up. Different how? Just different. May set down her fork. She had the expression of someone reporting a scientific observation, rather than making an emotional one, which was entirely May. You were at the table this morning and you laughed at something Nettie said, a real laugh, not the small kind. Nettie, who had been eating with her customary absorption, looked up. I'm funny, she said. I've always been funny, you just never laughed before. I laughed, Ethan said. Not like that, May said. The table was quiet for a moment. Cora kept eating, because this was not her conversation to enter, and she knew it. Ethan looked at May. He looked at Nettie. He looked at his plate. Things are better, he said. That's all. Is it because of Dobbins being gone? Nettie asked. Partly. Nettie pointed her fork at Cora. Is it because of Miss Cora? Nettie, May said. I'm asking Pa. Ethan looked at Cora. She raised her eyebrows slightly, not directing him, just watching. This was his to say or not say in whatever words he had. He looked at his daughters. Yes, he said. It's partly because of Cora. He said it simply and without flinching, and Cora felt the simplicity of it move through her like a clean wind. She came here and she... He stopped, tried again. She didn't let things be the way they'd been just because that's how they'd been. And that helped. Nettie absorbed this with the speed of the very young, processed it, and nodded. I knew she was staying, she said. I knew it the first night when she sat with us in Bisbee. You were 7, May said. You didn't know anything. I knew, Nettie said. I told you. You said don't get your hopes up. May looked at her plate. A faint color came into her face that wasn't quite embarrassment, more like the acknowledgement of being correctly called out. She looked up at Cora. I said that because I didn't want Nettie to be hurt again if you left, she said. Direct, clear, May's way. I know, Cora said. I was wrong, May said. About you specifically. I'm not sorry I was careful, but I was wrong about you. The words carried exactly what May intended them to carry. Not apology so much as correction, the adjustment of a record she kept in good conscience. "You weren't wrong to be careful," Cora said. "You were protecting your sister." That was right. May held her gaze. "You do that," she said. "Do what?" "Take the thing that could be an argument and make it not one." A beat. "Mama did that." The name landed softly this time, not like a stone the way it had in the beginning, more like a hand placed gently on a table. Cora looked at May. "I'm not trying to be her," she said quietly. "I know I'm not." "I know," May said. "I'm not saying you are." She looked at her plate, then back up. "I'm saying it's a quality I recognize, and She stopped, started again. "I appreciate it." May did not use that word easily. Cora knew that now, knew how much the word cost her and how precisely she spent it. "Thank you, May," she said. They started on the garden the following week. Not because Cora asked, and not because Ethan suggested it. It happened the way the best things happened between them, without planning one of them starting, and the other one arriving, and finding it natural to join in. She was pulling weeds in the early morning before the heat arrived, and she heard him come out of the cabin and cross the yard, and he crouched down beside her and started working without saying anything. They worked for an hour in the morning cool. The garden had good structure underneath everything that had grown over it, Martha's eye for it, the bones of something that had been genuinely tended. "She planted sweet peas along this side," Ethan said at one point. "We can plant them again," Cora said. "It's not too late in the season for a second try." He looked at her. His expression was the open, unguarded one that he wore more and more easily now, as though the muscles required for it were getting stronger with use. "Yes," he said. "We can." There was a week in that sentence. A month. Maybe more if she was reading it right, and she'd gotten very good at reading this man. She kept pulling weeds and let it sit between them and grow the way things grow when you give them room. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Go ahead." He sat back on his heels. He was looking at the dirt, but she could see him gathering himself. "I know it's only been 3 weeks," he said. 22 days, she said. He looked at her. "You've been counting." "I count things," she said. "It's how I keep track of the world." He nodded slowly. 22 days, he said. I know it's fast, by any measure." He stopped. "But I've been alone up here for 2 years, and in those 2 years I learned exactly what I was missing, and in 22 days you've shown me that what I was missing was—" He stopped again, jaw working, finding the words with the careful difficulty of a man who doesn't spend them carelessly. Someone who sits still in the middle of hard things. Someone who tells the truth when it's inconvenient. Someone who holds on to what matters and lets go of what doesn't. He looked at her. "I'd like you to stay. Not as the housekeeper. I'd like you to stay as—" He stopped. She waited. "I'm making a mess of this," he said. "You're doing fine," she said. "I'd like to court you," he said. "Properly. With your permission." He met her eyes fully. "And I'd like to know if that's something you'd consider. Knowing what I've told you about myself. Knowing what you've told me. Knowing that I come with 2 daughters and a mountain and a past I'll never stop carrying." She looked at him. This man who had spent 2 years teaching himself to be alone and 22 days unlearning it. Who smiled like something precious and rare and real. Who had held his daughter in a stage yard and closed his eyes. Who had sat beside her on a dark porch step and told her she wasn't alone anymore. "I'd consider it," she said. "I'd consider it very seriously." The thing that happened into his face then was not the smile exactly. It was something underneath the smile, something that had been waiting longer than the smile had. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah," she said. He reached over and brushed the dirt off her hand with his thumb and left his hand over hers, warm and solid and present. 22 days, he said, like he was counting 2 now. 22 days, she said. Barang. The sweet peas came up 3 weeks later, which was faster than either of them expected, because that July was gentler than the one before it, or maybe the soil had been waiting longer than the season and didn't need much encouragement once someone started paying attention. Nettie was the one who saw them first. She came in from outside at a run, with dirt on her knees, and both hands shouting for everyone to come look, and they all came. May with her book still in her hand, Ethan from the yard, Cora from the kitchen, and they stood at the edge of the garden in the morning light and looked at the thin green shoots coming up along the southern side, fragile and definite and unmistakably alive. Nettie looked up at Ethan. "Mama's sweet peas," she said. "Mama's sweet peas," Ethan said. His voice was steady. He put his hand on Nettie's shoulder, and she leaned into him without thinking about it, the automatic lean of a child who knows exactly where home is. May was looking at the shoots. Her face was quiet and full the way faces are when something holds too much to show all at once. Cora stood a step back and let the moment be what it was. The four of them. The garden, the summer morning. The thin green proof that things buried deep enough and long enough and tended with enough patience will come up when the season is right. Ethan looked back at her over his shoulder. She met his eyes. He reached back his free hand, the one that wasn't holding Nettie, and held it open, and she stepped forward and took it, and they stood there together at the edge of what was growing. This was not a fairy tale, and she'd never needed it to be one. She'd needed something real, real enough to hold weight, real enough to build on, real enough to stand up in hard weather. She'd arrived in Bisbee with $6 and a coin that had been dropped on the floor, and she'd walked through every door that opened, and some had led to more loss, and some had led to more road. And this one, this particular door at the end of a 2-hour mountain trail, in the worst July she could remember, had led to a kitchen table, and 2 little girls, and a man who'd forgotten how to smile, and was learning again. A person's worth wasn't something assigned by towns or circumstances, or the men who left them, or the storekeeper who dropped their coin without picking it up. It wasn't given out like wages, or taken away like credit. It was earned in the doing of things and the sitting still, and the standing up and the riding south, when the riding needed doing, and it accumulated quietly, the way all the truest things accumulate. Until one morning, you looked up and saw it growing where you'd planted it. Cora Jennings had ridden into Bisbee with nothing, standing in this mountain garden with this man's hand in hers, and these girls beside her, and the sweet peas coming up green and sure. In the summer light she understood clearly and completely, and without reservation, that she had arrived.